Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Babylon's Fall. I'm your host, Greg Mailer. Here on Babylon's Fall, we are critiquing the Johannine literature, both primarily the Gospel right now, and we use the epistles as needed, um, addressing those. We're not going to go specifically into those, but sometimes we will reference those. And then finally, at the end, we're going to be critiquing Revelation, where we'll see the full beast mode come out. But without further ado, let's hop back into the commentary on my book, John and the Final Revelation. Yesterday we left off in chapter 2, on verse 6, and that reads, Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, Fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, Draw some out now, and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. And when the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now. This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Okay, so this is set. Remember, Mary had, Jesus' mother had said, do whatever he tells you to do, even though Jesus seemed to have said no there. She didn't accept that answer. And I guess since she was kind of like the persistent widow in one of his parables, he went ahead and did what she had said or asked for. Now, as he says here, there's 6 giant water pots, and these are not small ones. They're 20 or 30 gallons, pretty big pots. And he performs an amazing miracle. He turns water into wine. And let's see. And it's such an interesting miracle that the wine he seems to have created is like it has been aged. We'll just say, like, even though it was made instantly, it tasted like it was like pristine wine that had been aged for years, as the master of the feast tells the bridegroom. Because I guess in his mind it was like, once all the people get drunk, you can give them the wine that you just pressed a few days ago, because they're not going to care what it tastes like. Does that make sense? Which goes into my point that this entire episode is kind of, how would you say, morally suspect, because why would Jesus use his divine authority and power to allow a wedding party the chance to get even more drunk? I mean, it just seems like a very weird miracle. And while it's interesting, it just seems like there's something weird to it. Like, if you look at the synoptic version of Jesus, he didn't use his miracles to do things like this. He didn't use them as parlor tricks. He didn't walk up to people and say, Hey, I saw you under the fig tree, like he did with Nathaniel. And so he might have every once in a while these clairvoyant insights, but he wasn't using them to try to impress people. And that's what this Jesus is doing. He's sort of like this, I don't know how to explain it. He's like this theatrical character who, this is how he proves himself through these miracles. And that's just not what came before. That's not the Jesus who came before. The Jesus who came before healed people, yes. Performed great miracles, yes. But it was to help people out who were sick, who were demon possessed, who were haunted by Satan. And he would cast out the demons. He would heal their injuries. And of course, you're going to see some of that in John's Gospel as well. But you're going to see some of this theatrics too. And this was not in the prior version. In fact, this miracle is only in John's Gospel. Let's see what else I had to say here. Let's go ahead and read some Strauss, because, as I said, I love quoting Strauss. So Let's see what he says about this. It has been urged both in ancient and modern times, but it was unworthy of Jesus that he should not only remain in the society of drunkards, but even further, their temperance by an exercise of his miraculous power. By this miracle, Jesus did not, as was usual with him, relieve any want, any real need, but only furnished an additional excitement of pleasure. Showed himself not so much as helpful or courteous, rather, so to speak, performed a miracle of luxury than of true beneficence. And hence Paulus, and then Paulus is another scholar that he references a lot in this book, kind of like Luck was another one. But Paulus is not wrong when he points out the contradiction which would lie in the conduct of Jesus if, towards the tempter, he rejected every challenge to such miracles as, without being materially beneficent or called for by any pressing necessity, could only formally produce faith and astonishment, and yet in this instance performs a miracle of that very nature. Okay, what is he talking about there? Well, back in the scene in the Synoptic Gospels, when Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert, he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. And then Satan came to try to tempt him. One of the things Satan tempts him with is, hey, if you're hungry, turn these rocks into bread. If you're the Son of God, you can do that, you know. And Jesus refuses and rebukes Satan, even though he really did have a legitimate need, but he refuses to use his divine powers for some type of parlor trick in order to help himself. And instead, in John's Gospel, he's using a parlor trick to try to, what does it say here? His disciples believed in him after this parlor trick. And that's just not the way Jesus behaved before John's Gospel. And that's what Strauss is pointing out there. Let's move to the next little verse here. Verse 12. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brothers, and his disciples. And they did not stay there many days. Now, the reason why I made this one its own little section is because that little one line, that little one sentence is just wedged in between there. So they went to Capernaum, but they didn't stay there very long. Okay, cool. Now let's move on to the next. Okay, so now it goes over, now the Passover to the Jews was at hand. So why is this little line here? Like, what does that help anyone know? I just thought that was really strange. Also, the one thing I will mention is it does say his brothers here. And that word right there is adelphoi. Anyway, it means from the same womb. And yet the Catholics, they do have a problem, because in the Catholic position, they believe Mary, his mother, only had Jesus come out of her womb. And she remained a virgin her entire life. She never had sexual relations with any man, ever, on their view. And so Jesus can't, if he had brothers, they can't be from her, because that's just what their doctrine says. It's not from the Bible anywhere, because the Bible says he has brothers and it has no problem with that at all. Yet, the Catholic position, because where they've wedged themselves with all of their decrees from the Pope and whatever, they have to somehow get around all of these things that the Bible actually teaches. And I think that's ridiculous. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to verse 13. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." And then his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." Okay, so we're at a wedding, and then we're told about a little short venture in Capernaum, okay? And the wedding was in Cana, And Capernaum and Cana were not very far away in Galilee, so that makes sense. And then all of a sudden, there's a Passover, which is a Jewish festival. So they go to Jerusalem, which would have been what Jews would have done. So this makes sense. Um, but while Jesus is there, he goes up into the temple and essentially walks up and starts throwing all their money down at the base of the temple, because at the temple they had all these little stalls set up. Oh, if you need some pigeons, 2 pigeons for whatever. They were just trying to sell things for your sacrifices so that you didn't have to bring them from your home if you were traveling. And so Jesus comes in there. He makes a whip of cords and he starts, get out of here, wow, yeah. and then he makes this comment here. Now, in the Synoptics, there is this same story, very, very similar. I'll read that one real quick. Now, this is from my compilation, and I talked about that in my foreword. I made a compilation effort where I tried to combine all 4 Gospels into one cohesive chronological narrative. And this is actually how I found out about a lot of these things and how there was all these problems in the process of making this. Now, what I would do is if there was a story that overlapped between them, I would combine them so that you lost none of the information. And if it had kind of a different way it put a sentence, I would put like an or in there. So let's look at this. Let's go to my thing, page 67. Let's click it. I'll see if I can go to page 67. Let's see. Okay, where's this at? 31. All right, 67. There we are. Okay, so somewhere in here, triumphal entry, I believe, is where it's at. So if you notice here, let me zoom in a little bit. As you can see where it says the triumphal entry, when it's in blue, that is Mark. If it's brown here, that's Matthew. Green is Luke, and red is John. And so what I would do is if they had a story that was overlapping, I would put in all the information into one story. And so that's I just wanted to show you that, just to show you how I did this, so that when I read it over here, it will make sense. Okay, so this little section says, so they came to Jerusalem. Then Jesus went into the temple of God and began to drive out those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. Then he taught, saying to them, Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of thieves. So that sounds very similar to what we have here. There's only one problem here. This scene here in the Synoptics happened at the very end of the ministry. That's why it's on page 67 of my 95-page document. It's literally taking place all the way at the end of the story. And so, however, in John's version, he has this right in chapter 2, the same exact story. And what do we do with that? Well, as I've been saying through all of this commentary, he's giving us a different narrative. He's giving us an entirely different story. So this is kind of just par for the course. There's only one big problem with this story, though, and here's the problem. And I'll quote E.P. Sanders on this. Now, E.P. Sanders is another historical Jesus scholar. He wrote a book called The Historical Figure of Jesus, and he says this. He says, the cleansing of the temple, which in the Synoptics is a prime cause of Jesus' execution, in John comes at the very beginning of his ministry, in the first trip to Jerusalem, and it has no serious consequence. And so in his mind, in E.P. Sanders' mind, when Jesus did this here, when he overthrew all the tables and stuff like that, it caused a legitimate threat to the temple services. And when they also heard him talk about how he would come and destroy the temple, or he said in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus had said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, So he had this idea that they had an idea that they heard him say that the temple would be destroyed. Okay, when they had that, and then they saw him knocking down things at the temple, they naturally wanted to arrest him. And in E.P. Sanders' view, that is why he was arrested. It wasn't because he claimed to be the Son of God or he broke the Sabbath. None of that junk. That's not historically true. Rather, these things are why he was arrested. And so this being at the beginning of the narrative is just another reason that this is not historical in E.P. Sanders' mind, and also in my mind. Here's why. When he comes here to the temple at the very beginning, he only has a handful of followers. Like we know about Andrew, Philip, Simon Peter, and maybe Nathaniel. So he's only got a couple followers. And he comes up here and makes this scene and knocks over the tables and attacks them with a whip. In this version, he attacks them with a whip, of course. And yet, nothing serious, as E.P. Sanders says. No, there was no serious consequence for this episode right here. And that's unbelievable. You can't go down anywhere, even in today, and start knocking down stuff and destroying property and not get in trouble for it. And so you couldn't do that in Jesus' day either. Now, what else do I want to say about that? I think that might be it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think that'll be good. Let's see what the next section is. Yeah, we'll start off there on the next section. I think that's pretty much it. Let's see if there's any other thing. Oh, there is one other thing, actually, before I go. Verse 17. Then his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house has eaten me up. Okay, I want to actually just read the paragraph. Let's see. Okay, right here. John adds an incredible detail, claiming that the disciples, whom the author forgot to even mention had traveled with Jesus in verse 13, suddenly remembered, seemingly in real time, the words written in Psalm 69:9. Zeal for your house has eaten me up. As Jesus is wrecking the marketplace, the narrator bizarrely provides us with a psychological glimpse into the inner thoughts of these brand new followers. The Apostle Paul famously quoted the next verse in that exact psalm in Romans 15:3. Okay, if you go look at Romans 15:3, you'll see that it's from Psalm 69:10, the literal next verse, proving that this scripture was a common piece of late developed Christian theology applied to Jesus, because Paul quoted it. But to imagine that just a week or two after Jesus had been baptized, these uneducated Galilean fishermen are already standing in the temple courtyard, matching psalm verses to physical actions that Jesus does, is completely preposterous. And it just serves as further evidence that what Strauss stated earlier, that under the pen of John, from the commencement to the close of the public life of Jesus, his messiahship shines forth in unchanging splendor. And I'm glad I remembered that, because that's an important point. Like the idea that they thought of this psalm as Jesus was knocking down these temple, that's the least thing they would have think. I mean, they would have been thinking, holy crap, look what he's doing. Like looking around like, man, these scribes and Pharisees are going to arrest us and take us to the Roman pontiff. That's what they would have been thinking. And that's not what was written here, though. And with that, I believe we will be done for this video. If you like this content, like and subscribe. And just thank you for watching. May God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.